with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Ring Rees Mogg. Put your calls to Jacob Rees-Mogg now. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
Morning to you, 3 minutes after 9 on Monday, November the 26th. I can say with absolute honesty, I've always looked forward to speaking with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's a Conservative MP and chairs the very important ERG, but rarely has there been a time more appropriate to welcome Mr. Rees-Mogg to the studio and indeed to the microphone, because of course we're told that this is the deal. 2 weeks effectively to sell it to the country. There's no point going back, and it's the best deal on the table. Jacob Rees-Mogg, good morning.
Good morning, Mr.
Your
Ferrari. The deal is a very bad deal and a very expensive deal and doesn't deliver on what the Prime Minister promised. So the backstop keeps us in the customs union. It divides up the United Kingdom between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The European Court of Justice still has a higher status than British courts, and we pay £39 billion for the privilege. The Prime Minister at one point used to go around saying no deal is better than a bad deal. It's hard to think of a deal that could be worse than this one.
Has she won anything?
It's hard to see what she's won. That she says she's got the amount of money down from what the EU was initially asking for. But as the House of Lords made clear in its report of March 2017, if we left without a withdrawal agreement, we didn't owe any money at all. So I've always thought that was rather a specious argument. I'm not even convinced about borders, actually, because that issue may well come into the next stage, and slipped into the agreement is that we will have social security cooperation, and that means we may still be paying benefits to EU nationals who come over in future. So even the avowed claim is one you can't be certain about.
And what do you see happening? Because at the moment the maths is clearly against the Prime Minister. She's going to have the most Herculean effort to win that around. So what happens then? Let's say it gets voted down, because that has to be the most likely option. Mr. Rees-Mogg, what happens then?
Well, I think if it gets voted down, we have to redouble the preparations for leaving without a withdrawal agreement. That's not something we should be frightened of. The latest scare story you may have seen in the Sunday newspapers was that we'd run out of drinking water if we left without a withdrawal agreement.
I also saw we're going to run out of Viagra. I don't know if you've noticed that. I mean, that's
I haven't, but one of the notices says that there may be troubles with our supplies of caviar, so people may be affected by all sorts of things depending on their predilections. But these scare stories are absurd, that we're not going to run out of clean drinking water. We managed to have clean drinking water long before a very large number of continental European countries. It's something we've been quite good at since the 19th century. So we're going to get more of these scare stories, but we need to make preparations, particularly to alleviate any problems around the Dover-Calais route. No doubt the Prime Minister will come back if the deal is rejected first time and try and get it through a second time. And really what it will be determined by is how the Labour Party votes. If the Labour Party were to abstain, or were to go along with the Prime Minister in the end, or a large part of it, that's our best route to getting the deal through, but that's incredibly divisive for the Conservative Party. Let's
get to the calls. That's what it's about. Call Rees-Mogg. And Paul in Beckenham, you're the first caller. Go ahead, Paul. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, Paul.
Yeah, I'd just like to start off by saying, don't you think it's a bit reckless now to try to vote down this deal the Prime Minister's worked so hard to achieve? I think it's I know it's not a perfect deal by any means, but I think it's just a sensible compromise. The country now, we're at such a critical point that surely we can support this deal. It's not going to change things overnight, but it's I think the most sensible approach, reflecting the vote of the referendum, really.
Stay on the line, Paul. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
No, I'm afraid, Paul, I don't agree with you that I don't think it's reckless to vote it down, because I think this deal is reckless. This deal is handing over control of our future to the European Union, in which we wouldn't even have a vote. So if you look at the withdrawal agreement, our tariffs would be set by the European Union, not by us. And that undermines the principle of no taxation without representation. We would have no say in the tariffs that were set on goods coming into the UK from third countries. This is a type of deal that no sensible country could accept. And £39 billion of taxpayers' money, your money, Paul, as well as mine, will go to pay for this. So I think it would be better to stick to what the Prime Minister said in the past, that no deal is better than a bad deal. This is a really bad deal.
Paul?
But the thing about this, though, I find concerning is that, the nation is completely divided now. I mean, business, CBI, the car industry, they're all saying, surely we should stick to this deal to create the certainty we need to continue, actually. So I'm only concerned, Jacob, that I know you're a principled politician, but I think, there is no other way. What are the consequences of turning this down? I mean, it's either going to lead to a general election, which I'm sure you don't want, or perhaps a second referendum, and I'm not sure that's going to even help, given the divisiveness or potentially divisiveness of.
Let's go back to Mr. Rees Mogg.
Thank you. There are a number of things. First of all, you mentioned the CBI, and interestingly, the CBI privately said that this was not a good deal, and publicly said it was marvellous. So the CBI could be guilty of a little bit of humbug, so I wouldn't take their words as gospel. On the issue of the divisiveness, you're absolutely right. This has created division in the country and in political parties. I think a second referendum would be even more divisive. And the third point is, what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is leaving and reverting to World Trade Organization terms, dealing with the EU as we deal with other countries in the world, which works perfectly successfully. We deal very effectively on world trade terms.
Only between 10 and 20% of our trade is done on WTO rules. China is one.
Hold on, WTO rules as a base. So then our non-EU trade is heading towards 60%.
Yeah,
so
I've got 55. So
that's right. That's WTO plus, so to speak, where there's some side agreements.
But we would be that base to start with, wouldn't we? A rather unattractive base.
Well, it's not an unattractive base. It allows for a facilitation of imports and exports. It sets out maximum levels of tariffs.
Do you want a no deal, Mr. Rees Mogg?
I would have liked to have seen a proper free trade deal, and I would still like to see an amelioration of no deal. That is to say, to do sensible things in the weeks before we leave, to say we will keep Dover-Calais running. I'd even be willing to offer them some money to have an implementation period, which the Prime Minister initially promised, to allow some of
in the past you've told me Dover will work fine. I remember you telling me this.
Dover will work, but it may have some delays, as has happened before. Bear in mind, there have been over, 200 days of Operation Stack in the last 10, 20 years? So without any problem for just-in-time deliveries and so on. So there may be some delays, but it's a question of ameliorating that and getting on with it. I was held up by the BBC, a broadcasting company you may have heard of, on saying that it took 6 seconds for customs goods to be cleared. And they wanted to know, why was I saying this? What was my source? Well, it did turn out I was wrong. It was only 5 seconds, and my source was HMRC's evidence to the House of Commons for 94% of goods that are outside the EU. So these things can be done very, very efficiently and quickly.
Paul, thank you. Let's get another caller in. Douglas in Chertsey, you're through to Jacob Rees Mogg. Douglas, morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you both. My question would be, Jacob, if that you don't like the deal that Theresa May's got, and I don't like it either, we shouldn't have another referendum. But if we do, there should only be 2 questions, because she's already agreed we're leaving. We leave on the deal that she has, or we leave on WTO rules. No, remain as well. Just those 2 options. Which one would you take?
Well, I'd definitely take leaving without a deal rather than this really very bad deal, this failure of a deal. Let's be blunt about it. The Prime Minister said one thing in the election manifesto and in her various speeches and has done another, and that is, to my mind, a definition of failure. But Douglas, I don't want a second referendum. I don't think that's the right answer. And
I
think
moving dangerously close towards it, though? You and your colleagues who will vote this down, I could show you a chart, you've probably seen it in the papers as well, where this could deliver us towards a second referendum. You must at least be alive to that.
Dude, I'm alive to all sorts of risks, and you have to balance them and see how they're possible. Sir David Nartzler, in his very important evidence to the Brexit Select Committee, made it clear that short of legislation, there is no parliamentary mechanism to get a referendum. And bear in mind, we leave on the 29th of March, so there's now very little time to put in place a second referendum without further legislation. And how's that going to get through Parliament? I think that would be very difficult. But Douglas's point on the question, I think, is a relevant one, because most people who want a second referendum just want to overturn the result of the first referendum. It's the loser's referendum.
Douglas, thank you. Tom in Ottershaw. Tom, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, Tom.
Hi. Aside from the fact our obligations are written in granite in the withdrawal agreement, and any potential benefits are written on tissue paper in the political statement, I've got a concern about Article 135, paragraphs 1 and 2, which essentially gives away the rebate. So we'll essentially be paying full price for everything with no rebate. And that is completely at odds with the government statement that no member state will be worse off, and nor will we. So I don't understand where the rebate money is coming from.
Well, you make a very valid point. The first one, that the withdrawal agreement is real, and the political declaration is warm words. It's not to be taken seriously. And we've already heard from the President of France, when he's not dealing with riots at home, that he is going to try and get fishing rights for the French in return for trade deals. So
How real a fear is that, would you say, for the British fishing industry? He's not alone. The Dutch are looking on rather enviously, as are the Danes, I believe.
I think it's a very real fear that this government can't be trusted. That's the problem. It said lots of good things and then done other ones. So when it now says, oh, don't worry, we'll safeguard fish, why would anybody believe them? That's the problem. But to come back to the specific point...
Do you think she can be trusted?
No, not on this issue at all. She has said so many things and then done the reverse. So it's very difficult now to believe the statements the government makes, or made in the name of the Prime Minister, or even by the Prime Minister on this issue. But relating to Article 135, paragraph 1 and 2, which I don't have immediately in front of me, but if there is an extension to the transition period, we would be in a new multi-annual financial framework where the budget would have been set by the EU without us having any say, or as previously actually a veto over the multi-annual financial framework, and I would be astonished if they didn't take away our rebate under those circumstances. That's why one of the reasons this is such a bad deal.
Tom?
Yeah, well, they take it away immediately we sign the withdrawal agreement, because we derogate from decision 2014/335. So that's it, it's gone once we sign. No business would sign this agreement. No business in the whole world.
I sense possibly, Jacob Rees Mogg, you would agree with that.
I agree. I mean, I think it is a really bad one-sided agreement. No wonder it only took the EU 38 minutes to agree it, because they'd won the lottery.
Just come back to something you mentioned there. You brought Emmanuel Macron. We were talking about Emmanuel Macron. And I think as you came into the studio and we have our sort of brief couple of minutes of exchanges, you and I have both been reading the same material over the course of the weekend. Monsieur Macron has considerable problems at home that he should be addressing, doesn't he?
Oh, indeed, that there are riots along the Champs-Élysées, that 100 people have been injured and 2 have been killed, motorways have been closed, widespread rioting over fuel price increases. And I know the French...
And mobilisation of more than 100,000 across the whole of the country, and demonstrations, plan to go on.
Absolutely, and the demonstrations becoming more violent. And we know that the French demonstrate more than the British do, and they have done for hundreds of years, but this seems a really serious level of demonstration, and seems to have been remarkably little reported in the UK, surprisingly little. And I think this is part of the problem of politics on the continent, that the EU is not a range of nations that are at ease with themselves at the moment. They have very deep-seated political problems, and we should be watching what's going on in the EU and its member states with great care.
All right. Let's read some of the text, tweets and emails that are coming in. This is from Michael. The current Brexit Secretary has been on Nick's show defending this deal and saying that it is not a capitulation, it's just the start of building blocks. How does Jacob Rees-Mogg respond to that?
Steve Barclay is a very good, distinguished figure and an honourable Brexiteer, but on this I disagree with him. This is a capitulation, and I suppose it's like saying that you've knocked down your house and now you've got the building blocks to build a new one, but you've knocked the house down in the first place. So you could argue logically that what he says is true, but it gives a misleading impression.
Rachel in Bexley, do you regret your mistimed attempt at a coup? This was to get the signatures, of course.
Thank you. It's a very important question to raise. No, I think it had to be done. If other people didn't want to go with me, that's a matter for them. But I came to the conclusion that coming on programmes like this and saying we needed to change the policy and not the person had simply not become a sustainable view, that there's no method of changing the policy without the person being changed. And if I thought that, I felt I had to say it publicly. I'm sorry it hasn't worked, because I'm afraid the Prime Minister is leading us to failure.
You think it hasn't worked full stop? We put it to bed now?
Oh, well, we haven't got the letters. I think we'll see. It's not impossible.
Would the events of this weekend, do you think that might bring forth more letters?
I'm not going to make forecasts on letters. Captain Mannering learns from things that don't happen according to plan and makes new plans.
OK. What do we understand the figure to be? Do we know what it is?
We don't know.
Don't even know what it is. All right. OK, let's come back to some more calls. Let's go to Trevor in Southampton. Trevor, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Mr. Rees Mogg, I am 100% with you on your views on Brexit, as are almost every Conservative voter that I know. I am a lifelong Conservative voter. I will never vote Conservative again if this goes through. Never. And that applies to just about everybody I know. Now that we're at crunch time, can you encourage your colleagues to stand up and be counted like you already have, suggesting they put their letters in? But this is the crunch time. This is more important than the Conservative Party, and if they do not back this up, the Conservative Party will disintegrate.
Trevor, you express my own fears that, you see, some people say...
Aren't you leading to the disintegration? Some would say you're leading to the disintegration by showing a degree of disloyalty.
I'm loyal to the manifesto on which I stood and to the principles of the Conservative Party. Sometimes leaders are not loyal to their own words. And you can't back leaders who do one thing and say another. But I think Trevor's point is so important. There are people out there who are trying to say, don't vote for this deal and we'll get Jeremy Corbyn. I think this is completely the wrong way round. The risk for the Conservative Party is that we fail to deliver Brexit properly. Gentlemen like Trevor, and I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of correspondents saying the same thing, lifelong Conservatives feeling completely let down, then Jeremy Corbyn gets in because Conservatives don't turn out to vote at the next election. That is the territory the Prime Minister has taken us into. It's not a proper Brexit, followed by Jeremy Corbyn. And that should make people in Downing Street think really seriously about what they're doing, the mistakes they've made, and So
then you have a poorly prosecuted Brexit. You then have a Labour government come in that, as we understand it, will probably tax considerably higher until the proverbial pipsqueak. And it all tracks back to the Conservative Brexit deal. Is that
basically,
to course,
yes.
What you're saying?
That puts it more pithily than I was doing.
Yes, OK. Trevor, back to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Mrs May and Mr Hammond have let down the Conservative voters. The Conservative voters do not agree with her at all. A small minority. She has let us down. She's led us down the garden path. She got the job by lying about her intentions. She's lied all the way through, as Mr. Rees Mogg has politely described it. She has lied, and lied, and the Conservative voters will not have this.
All right. Well, she's not here to defend herself.
Lie is a very harsh word,
yes,
which I avoid using. But I do think that she and the Chancellor are Remainers and have remained Remainers, and that the Prime Minister gave a press conference Friday a week ago where she said this was the Brexit she'd always wanted. And that made me really suspicious because it wasn't the Brexit she'd promised, and that plays to Trevor's comments.
Let's say somehow there is a change in tack. What is it that informs you that you think the other side of the negotiations, the EU, would be willing to give concessions and to give ground that clearly they haven't over the preceding 2.5 years?
Yes, I think that's a very important point. Why would things suddenly be improved now? First of all, they've won on every point so far. So they've found that simply by saying no, they've got everything that they could possibly have wanted. We've been very weak and they've been tough. If you turn around and say, OK, look, this deal is off, and we are going to leave on the 29th of March, and you're not getting a penny, and we're going to put 70% tariffs on Irish beef, and we're going to put 200% tariffs on German cars.
They'll respond, of
You
course.
may find... they'll respond.
Whoever won a trade war, Mr. Rees Mogg?
Donald Trump.
He
seems to win every single one, doesn't he?
OK. The shares aren't that great now, of course. The Trump bump is over.
I would never judge an economy by a stock market. Stock markets are reflections of value that may have been created in the past or of movements that are happening separately.
How did he win the trade war then? Because machines were banned and motorcycles were banned from being sold.
And not Donald Tusk. Jean-Claude Juncker went over and immediately agreed to what President Trump was suggesting. So if you negotiate toughly, you can sometimes do better. But as we get near to the 29th of March, it may be in everybody's interest to have a simplified deal. We'll pay them a bit of money, but we'll have an implementation period.
You've got time.
Oh, you've always got time. The EU is very good at agreeing things at the last minute.
And when you saw that sort of implacable stance over the weekend from Jean-Claude Juncker and others, this is the deal, this is the deal.
But of course they say that.
Yes, I was going to say that's just posturing, effectively.
That's posturing to help Theresa May. They've got the deal of the century, so now they're doing their best to back Theresa May. Of course they are. What would you expect?
Trevor, thank you. Ahmed in New Malden. Ahmed, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick, and good morning, Mr. Rees Mogg.
Good morning, Ahmed.
I respect your views, and I like your style, which is excellent.
Thank you.
But may I just say that, you had a very good opportunity to carry out your campaign regarding Brexit, but I think Mrs. May has now achieved the impossible agreement. I think it encompasses and safeguards all the main issues that were of concern to everybody. Now, obviously, the transitional period allows things to be negotiated, and also, the EU, Mr. Barnier and Mr. Juncker and Mr. Tusk, they have all said we will remain allies, and in...
I've got to move you to your question, my friend Ahmed. What is your... I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you, sir.
Shouldn't you now allow Mrs. May to get on with this, and she should have the support of all our MPs and everybody else?
Ahmed, you make a very sensible point that in an implementation period, transition period, there may be things that people don't like. And I was willing to accept that with an end date of December 2020. It was a compromise, but a sensible one that helped ease the changes that were going to be made. What is different is the backstop, because the backstop would keep us tied to the EU as a rule taker in perpetuity. There's no exit. And the best argument that the government can come up with is that the EU doesn't really like the backstop anyway. If the EU doesn't like the backstop, why was it so insistent about the backstop? Why did it write it into the text and demand that it was there? So I'm afraid that line from the government I simply don't believe. The backstop has no end date, and that means we are a rule taker from the EU and we're paying for the privilege. That's not the Brexit people voted for.
Thanks for that, Ahmed. Marianne in Belfast. I'm concerned that this could affect me and my children, my family, as we live here in Northern Ireland. Can Jacob Rees-Mogg spell out exactly the fears? And are we, as some people say, going to be taking our rules from EU but staying in the UK? What would you say to Marianne?
I think Marianne is right to be concerned. The position for Northern Ireland is deeply troubling because its law will be more influenced by Dublin than by Westminster.
Only during the transition is what the Prime Minister would say.
No, during the backstop.
Yes, during the backstop.
But the backstop doesn't have an end date. So you say, we've discussed...
But they can't legally, neither party can legally stay in it, can they? They have to show best endeavours to find a way out of it, and whatever it may be.
On what basis? What's the legal opinion that says that?
But that's what I understood.
That's what the government's been saying.
Yes, that's what the government says.
But the government said a lot of things have turned out not to be true. If you look at Article 50, it says the framework for the future relationship. If this is agreed as the framework for the future relationship, that's covered by Article 50 and has legal standing, and they've put in the supremacy of the European Court of Justice, which would have been the risk to it. If that weren't in, then there would be the chance of it being overruled. But it's got ECJ approval, it's got a customs union in perpetuity, it's got no exit mechanism unilaterally for the UK. So we're more tightly bound than under the Lisbon Treaty in Article 50 to the rules coming from the EU in certain areas. And I think this is very troubling for Northern Ireland because as long as the backstop is there, Northern Ireland's regulations, I think there are 291 listed regulations that would be EU law applying in Northern Ireland over which the Northern Irish would have no say. That's really worrying.
And just last before I come to the next caller, which is going to be Michael, do you think, and I'm not for one moment putting forward the idea of a second referendum because I think actually that could be quite dangerously divisive, so I'm not supporting that, but do you think the great British public, seeing what they see themselves now, knowing what do you think they'd still have voted Brexit?
They'd have voted Brexit, but they might not have wanted Theresa May to be their leader to deliver Brexit. The country is much braver than the politicians. Politicians are basically, Theresa May and the current government's in the business of managing decline. It's got no confidence in the ability of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, to do better. And that's why it's got this very bad deal. It's about tying ourselves to the apron strings of Europe, because we think if we're not tied into that, we can't succeed on our own. I reject this analysis. I think we do much better on our own, and that's what people voted for. And they voted for it in their droves, in spite of being told by the OECD, the IMF, the Bank of England, the Treasury, that we were all doomed if we dared to disobey our betters. And that shows the wonderful spirit of the British people, their optimism about their own future. And it's a deep sadness that a Conservative government is so craven.
Michael in Edinburgh. Michael, you're through to Jacob Rees Mogg. Go ahead, sir. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, Michael.
The issue that I want to mention is to do with the Rock of Gibraltar. But,
yes.
I just want to say, Theresa May has, I know you don't like the expression lied, but she's given us so many mistruths that I'm very, very angry. I think we're being led up the garden path so severely that we'll never get over it. But,
come to Gibraltar if you would, because we're heading into our last couple of minutes, Michael, and I want you to be sure to get your question across, sir.
Yeah, well, she's telling us that Gibraltar, the sovereignty of Gibraltar is not in question here, and that, everything will be nice and smooth at the end. But, are we to believe that? She's told us that we're not going to be in the customs union. She's told us that we're, in a fine position in that respect. But she has told us mistruths. And is she telling us mistruths over Gibraltar? Is she going to hand it to them on a platter?
Well, I don't know if she'd do that, but Jacob Rees Mogg.
I would like to say that my default position is to trust statements made by the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, but the evidence is that I can't say that, because we were told we'd be out of the customs union, we wouldn't divide up the United Kingdom, and we'd be out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. None of these turn out to be true. So when, Michael, you say to me, can I be certain about Gibraltar, when the Spanish European minister is saying it's the best deal since 1713, which is, I think, around the time of the Treaty of Utrecht, if not the time of the Treaty of Utrecht, I think the Spanish may be telling us something that we should listen to.
You're worried about Gibraltar?
Well, Mr. Picarda isn't, as the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, and I think it's always dangerous to be more Catholic than the Pope, so I will listen to Mr. Picarda's future statements with care.
There's a concern.
There's a concern because Mr. Picarda may be relying on what the Prime Minister is saying.
Just last minute, a couple of questions from me, if that's all right, Mr. Rees Mogg. I know you, like I, in the mornings always turn to the Times leader articles to get an idea of what's going on. And to summarise their lead item today, leader article, is that any other idea of a supposed Plan B is a fantasy or peddled by fantasists. This is the only deal on offer. They don't go as to say it's a good deal, but this is the only deal on offer, therefore you should probably move towards it.
Well, this morning I read The Sun first, and I read Trevor Kavanagh's brilliant piece, which I would encourage all your leaders to look at.
Listeners.
But, your listeners, sorry. Your readers,
I have many leaders and bosses.
Readers in the Sunday Express as well. I think Trevor hit the nail on the head in his piece about the failures of this deal and indeed of Theresa May. As far as the Times go, well, then we leave without an agreement, and that's not something to be frightened of. We can get through that remarkably well, and then we get all the benefits of Brexit, which we don't talk enough about. This really exciting opportunity to make our economy better, make the standard of living for people better, reduce the cost of food, clothing and footwear, helping the least well-off in our society, controlling immigration, helping wages, again, for the least well-off in our society. Really exciting opportunities from leaving, which we will get if we go on the 29th of March cleanly.
All right, and lastly then, to borrow another great campaigner for The Sun, if I were to turn you into Mystic Mogg, as opposed to Mystic Meg from The Sun, in 2 weeks' time we're due to meet again, God willing. Where will the Prime Minister find herself when we meet again in 2 weeks?
We will be waiting with bated breath for the meaningful vote, which I hope will fail.
Do you think she's going to make any ground?
I don't think... Well, opinion polling is that the country recognises this deal for the dud that it is.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you as always.
Time for it. Jacob Rees Mogg, Conservative MP, chairs the ERG, joining us here on LBC, where the time is 9:31.
Jacob Rees Mogg has told LBC it wouldn't be reckless to vote down Theresa May's Brexit deal, as the agreement itself is reckless. This afternoon, the Prime Minister will challenge MPs to